My name is Peter Goodman. I am currently an assistant professor of journalism at Hofstra University, but for 36 or 37 years before that, I was a journalist at newspapers. And this is an experience that happened to me within the first 6 months that I was working at newspapers. In fact, it happened on the night of April 4th, 1968, because that was the night that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Little bit of background. I had just turned 22. I had been working at the Springfield Union in Springfield, Massachusetts for about 6 months. I had no experience in journalism. I was learning on the job. I really didn't understand what I was doing or how the place worked, but apparently I was doing well enough to continue to work. And I was a police reporter on weekends. This was a Thursday night. I don't know whether the city had already started rioting, but I do know that there was a lot of urgency, and I was assigned to go to the Springfield Police Department to find out what the reaction of the police was to the assassination of Martin Luther King. I'd been doing weekend cops, so I knew some of the police officers. The only one with whom I had any kind of relationship at all was the deputy chief, whose name I'm forgetting, but it'll come. It was Paul something or other. And so I went down to the police station, and I was in the deputy chief's office, and we were talking about something or other. And my memory is that one of the cops from what was called the Crime Prevention Bureau, which was actually the Juvenile Bureau, came hurrying in to the deputy chief's office. And whether he had a pith helmet or whether he was carrying a rifle, I don't know. I have a memory that he was wearing something odd. And he said to the deputy chief, I just got back from Memphis, boss. You got anything more for me to do? And so I stayed at the police station for a while, and I watched what they were doing, and I listened to a couple of cops, and I talked to some cops, and I went back to the office, and I started to write the story. And the only lead that I could write was there was an air of suppressed joy at the Springfield Police Department last night. I wrote 2 or 3 takes after that. I don't know what I wrote. I do know that was the only lead because it was the truth. That's how they seemed to feel. So I handed in my copy, and the night city editor, who was a guy named Joe Cotton, who actually was very good, but I thought that he was a sadist and a son of a bitch, because he was always giving us grief and yelling at us and saying, "What are you doing? Don't you know anything?" and things of that sort. So he starts reading the copy, and I may be making this up, but "Goodman, get over here." And so I went over, and he handed me the copy, and he said, "You can't write that." And I went back to my desk, and I tried. I couldn't think of another lead. That was the news. That's what was happening. Now, thinking about it decades later, I can imagine ways to handle the story. But at that time, that was the story. And I tried 2 or 3 times, and I couldn't get it. There was no way that he was going to run that story. And I knew that he couldn't run the story. I didn't even have I had no argument. I knew why he couldn't run the story. If he had run that story, whatever was happening in Springfield that night was going to be a lot worse the next day. So he spiked the story, and I was really upset. I was very upset. I didn't know what to do. because a little bit further background, before I started working for the newspaper, when I was a student, I wasn't what I considered to be radical, but I was a member of the Young Independents, which was a forerunner of the SDS on the campus of the University of Massachusetts. I had been very active in the University Reform Society. I had been at demonstrations in Washington a number of times. I was pretty left and pretty liberal. And even before this happened, I used to get into arguments with the cops about race relations and about drugs and about the Vietnam War. And I was not a particularly good police reporter, but here I was basically confronted with a direct assault on my principles, or what I thought were my principles. And I went outside and I walked around the building. I don't know how long, but I remember going outside and walking around and trying to decide what to do, and thinking that the only legitimate thing for me to do, the only honest thing to do, I had to quit. I had to quit. I couldn't keep that job. I was supposed to write the truth, and I wrote it, and they wouldn't let me. They couldn't publish it. And I guess that's when I learned that I really wasn't as principled as I thought I was, because I went back in, and I didn't quit. Over the next couple of days, I tried to write the story. There was a fellow on the copy desk whom I thought was a really good professional journalist, because he'd worked for UPI in Europe, and therefore he was a pro. And he tried to help me a little bit, but I couldn't write it. But I didn't quit. I continued to be a reporter, and I stayed as a reporter I stayed at Springfield for another couple of years, and then I went to Hartford. But that was my dark night of the soul as a journalist, I guess. And that's the story.